Humans are the only animals stupid enough to starve themselves because they do not like their reflection in a lake, or to experience profound physiological panic because a digital peer group ignored their status update. Natural selection is supposed to be a ruthless optimization algorithm that weeds out useless, energy-consuming bugs, yet it somehow looked at crippling existential dread, teenage angst, and secondhand embarrassment and decided these were highly adaptive traits worth keeping. If you look at a crocodile, its emotional palette is gloriously efficient: run, eat, fight, or mate. A crocodile does not lie awake at 3 in the morning wondering if its peers respect its contribution to the swamp basking community. It does not experience the agonizing sensation of a hot flush when it misses a hunt. For decades, evolutionary biologists struggled to explain why nature allowed us to develop such a tortuous internal theater of complex emotions, particularly when these feelings frequently lead to clinical depression, cardiovascular disease, and self-sabotaging behaviors that actively decrease reproductive success. In a purely Darwinian world, spending thousands of calories crying over a deceased relative or feeling paralyzed by social anxiety is an absolute waste of precious resources that should have been spent foraging for tubers or outrunning apex predators. Yet, we remain entirely ruled by these invisible, agonizing scripts. The prevailing theory for a long time was that our emotional complexity was merely an accidental byproduct of our ballooning brains, a sort of evolutionary tax on high intelligence. But that theory is wrong. The reality is far more calculated, sinister, and brilliant. Our capacity for profound psychological suffering is actually a highly sophisticated survival mechanism, a biological cheat code that allowed a weak, hairless ape to dominate the food chain, driven by a specific evolutionary trade-off we will uncover. To understand how our emotional torture chamber was built, we must examine the expensive tissue hypothesis and the physical restructuring of the hominid brain. Around 2 million years ago, our ancestors made a massive dietary pivot toward nutrient-dense meats and cooked tubers. This caloric windfall allowed our digestive tracts to shrink and our brains to balloon, expanding from an average volume of 400 cubic centimeters to nearly 1,400. But this massive cognitive upgrade came with a terrifying catch. A larger brain requires an absurd amount of fuel, consuming 20% of our resting metabolic energy while making up only 2% of our body weight. To justify this immense energy drain, the brain had to deliver immediate high-yield survival benefits. It did this by constructing a complex neural bypass between our primitive survival engine, the amygdala, and our newly evolved executive coordinator, the prefrontal cortex. In lower mammals, the limbic system processes basic stimuli with binary responses. A shadow equals danger, which triggers cortisol and adrenaline, prompting flight. Humans, however, develop the unique ability to run high-fidelity simulations of the future. We did not just react to immediate threats, we anticipated them years in advance. When you pair an overactive imagination with primitive survival chemistry, simple fear mutates into chronic anxiety, and immediate anger mutates into long-term resentment. Neurotransmitters like dopamine, which once simply signaled the location of a ripe fruit, were hijacked to regulate complex social status. Oxytocin, the hormone responsible for mother-infant bonding, was scaled up to coordinate tribal loyalty. Most brutally, the anterior cingulate cortex, which registers physical pain from a broken bone, was rewired to register social rejection using the exact same neural pathways. Our brains became hypersensitive feedback loops where abstract thoughts could trigger physical agony, establishing an infrastructure capable of generating pure, synthetic misery. This biological infrastructure was not designed for individual happiness. It was forged to solve the ultimate evolutionary nightmare: other people. For a physically weak primate, isolation was an immediate death sentence. On the Pleistocene savanna, a lone human could not hunt mammoths, defend territory, or raise offspring. Survival required living in tight-knit groups, which presented a massive game theory problem. How do you prevent individuals from cheating, stealing, or slacking off while still reaping the benefits of cooperation? The answer was the development of self-policing emotional software. Enter guilt, shame, and pride. These are not luxury feelings. They are highly specialized regulatory algorithms designed to manage Dunbar's number, the theoretical limit of 150 stable social relationships a human can maintain. If a human stole food from the tribe, the community would retaliate with exclusion. To prevent this lethal outcome, nature installed an internal alarm system. Shame became a physical surrender signal, causing us to avert our gaze, slump our shoulders, and blush. This involuntary display communicated submissiveness to the group, de-escalating conflict and preventing banishment. Guilt functioned as an internal debt collector, keeping an automated ledger of social transgressions and forcing the individual to make amends before the group noticed. Conversely, pride became the subjective reward for elevating one's social status, driving individuals to perform altruistic acts that benefited the collective. The human brain essentially outsourced its moral behavior to a chemical punishment and reward system. We became biologically incapable of being truly selfish without feeling sick, and biologically incapable of being isolated without feeling pain. We did not cooperate because we were noble. We cooperated because our brains held us hostage, with the threat of chemical torture if we did not conform, creating a self-reinforcing loop of tribal survival. This brings us back to our initial paradox. If emotions are designed to keep us alive, why would nature allow us to experience grief so intense that it can literally stop a human heart through stress-induced Takotsubo cardiomyopathy? Why would natural selection design a mother to be completely incapacitated by the loss of an infant, making her vulnerable to predators and unable to care for herself? The answer lies in the mechanics of the brain as a predictive processing machine and the absolute necessity of unconditional commitment. In a hostile world, half-hearted alliances do not survive. To ensure that parents invest decades of grueling effort into raising helpless infants, and that mates defend each other to the death, the brain had to create a bond of non-negotiable value. It did this by hardwiring our neural architecture to treat our loved ones as literal extensions of our own physical selves. The brain constructs highly detailed, real-time neural models of our close companions, projecting our own identity onto theirs. When a loved one dies, the brain does not just experience a sad thought, it experiences a catastrophic prediction error. The physical reality of their absence clashes violently with the brain's deeply ingrained neural expectations. Grief is the agonizing, high-energy computational process of the brain violently tearing down and rewriting its neural map of reality, accompanied by a massive surge of cortisol and a plummeting of oxytocin. It is the neurological price we pay for the capacity to form high-fidelity, life-saving social bonds. If we could easily shrug off the loss of a partner or child, we would never have fought hard enough to protect them in the first place. Love and grief are the same biological coin. We are forced to pay the toll of devastating sorrow because it is the only collateral strong enough to guarantee our mutual survival. The tragic irony of our brilliant emotional system is that it was perfected for a world that no longer exists. Our emotional hardware was meticulously calibrated for small bands of hunter-gatherers wandering the Pleistocene savanna, where every social interaction was immediate, personal, and critical to survival. Today, we carry this same hypersensitive ancestral equipment into a hyper-connected, digital concrete jungle. Our brains do not know the difference between a minor professional critique from a supervisor over email and a tribal elder preparing to banish us into the freezing wilderness to starve. We treat a temporary decline in social media engagement with the same chemical panic our ancestors reserved for a failing harvest. The algorithms of modern technology have effectively weaponized our evolutionary survival mechanisms against us, farming our capacity for outrage, jealousy, and status anxiety for corporate profit. We are flooded with synthetic status signals from millions of highly curated strangers, forcing our brains to constantly calculate our social standing against an impossible global baseline. The result is a widespread mismatched disease of the mind, where the very tools that kept us alive in the wild are now driving us to chronic distraction and clinical despair in civilization. We are the architects of a world we are biologically unequipped to inhabit, suffering from an evolutionary debt we can never hope to repay. In the end, our complex emotions are not a glorious testament to our spiritual superiority, nor are they a design flaw. They are the highly efficient, occasionally agonizing machinery of an animal that traded peace of mind for global dominion. We conquered the planet not because we were the smartest or the strongest, but because we were the most desperately, beautifully, and miserably sensitive creatures to ever exist, forever trapped in a cage of our own evolutionary success.